All right, so here's our first thing that we're going to get done. I just went ahead and put together a GitHub repo and downloaded it, and setting up the virtual environment for PyCharm here, and getting those packages, PySide, Spoken, just the normal Qt stuff put in. So yeah, I'm just going to kind of talk over this maybe in the beginning. I'm going to talk a little bit more broadly and then kind of describe stuff as I go in later videos or as we get further into this one. But basically, I just need something at the start here for the whole project. It's going to be suddenly losing my train of thought. It's going to be the Python code for pretty much all of the projects, and it'll also contain the entry point to the pipeline. I'll make a launcher here, which I talked about in the last video, with at least 4 buttons to start with. Maya, Unreal, some Substance program, maybe both of them, Designer and Painter, and then like a settings menu. And so here I'm just kind of setting up like a normal CLI file, a launch file to kind of manage each of the different ways to launch stuff, where we can append things to the various Python paths or type of paths that each of the DCC looks at, and just kind of get the initial bit of my project structure down. And I tend to work pretty heavily in configs. They're just super easy, especially like anytime that I need to change something that I think could be different from project to project. You can just change it in the config. And here I'm just pasting a pretty general IO library, something that is just about folder management, like creating folders, deleting folders, getting the user's app data folder and stuff like that. And yeah, so pretty much just the very general framework. This only goes for about like 15 minutes. But so some things that I'm thinking about while setting this up is, although I had a plan for some number of DCCs, I don't know exactly how many I'm going to support in the future. And I know that a lot of DCCs handle things differently. So I need to figure out some structure that's going to be pretty program agnostic. I really like helper libraries, for example, and I really like helper libraries being very, very generalized, because I don't really know how a program is going to implement them. And then I might make a helper library that's for that specific DCC, which is, just pretty generic, normal stuff. But again, the two things that I need to combat are the unknowns that come up on different projects and how future me is going to be using the code base. People kind of change their habits. They change what they like, what they find to be good, all the time, including myself. Not, every day, but like over time, I realize, oh, well, I did this in the past, and now there's some new module, or I learned some better way to do it, or whatever. So I just need to preemptively kind of make sure that I don't tie my hands behind my back for those. And a little bit of stuff here, I think I pasted some stuff from another thing, just another project, and I was kind of looking at, I have a set of tools, like a toolbox kind of repo, and that's my other PyCharm window off to the other monitor. So sometimes I go over to that to look for stuff throughout this, but it doesn't really matter. So yeah, knowing that there's an unknown number of DCCs, and they could all be different, it's kind of a challenge. I don't really know how I'm going to be using them. I don't know who else is going to be using the tools. Probably is mostly just me, but you never know. And yeah, just setting up some basic, easy ways to get paths and thinking about the different kinds of things that I might want to be saving to. Things that are very subject to change, like in the last video, if the program installation paths are consistent, then we can just set that and save it in a place that everyone can reference. If they're inconsistent, then we probably need to get stuff from like a user directory. Where did you put your installs? Just label them in this UI. And, then the pipeline can reference that. So also like naming convention is probably going to change from project to project. Directory structure can definitely change, and I have written a lot of tools that are kind of dynamic directory structure based, where you sort of provide like a schema and then it understands how to publish from there. Like you say, here's all the tokens or all the different folders that make up the entire path, and the ones that the tool care about, like the asset name, would get from here, or the category would get from here. Here's where like publishes and versions are going to be saved. I'm not going to worry about all of that because I really don't like doing that if I don't have to. If you just have a directory structure, things go infinitely smoother. If your directory structure is super wildly different from project to project, uh, one, you're probably taking on like way different projects that your pipeline is going to be spreading itself super thin for to work on. And two, I don't, your workflows probably you could just adapt to like some more core sort of directory structure. I don't know that they need to be so wildly different. And lastly, it's just so much faster to make publishers and browsers based on a predefined directory structure rather than have it loop through a JSON and figure out, is this a fixed value? Does the user enter this? You know, you can definitely do those if you want all of the control, but I've done those at work already, and they're very frustrating. Whoops. I'm installing Unreal in the background, and it came up over my window. I'm watching the recording right now. Yeah, so this is just me plugging in some default values just to get stuff to go, and just trying to figure out how to dynamically get the Maya site packages. You need to. That's very important because if you want to add in your own folders, extra folders for extra site packages or stuff, Shiboken ends up throwing a huge fit if you try and put stuff in front of those in the path. So when Maya starts reading in those different folders, if it doesn't read in its own folder first, Shiboken has some like memory conflicts, I think. I can't quite remember, but it basically just crashes Maya whenever you try to run anything that calls from it. And I don't really know that I'll be using a whole lot of command line, but just in case, I'm setting up like a CLI arc parser. Very like typical standard stuff that you might find at like a larger studio. If it's on like an indie thing, you might never see this, but I, again, don't exactly know where I'm going to be going with this. This is just kind of a thing that I'm doing on, or decided to do on a whim. And the folder structure for the project is going to be very, very simple. It's basically most things go in the root unless there's a group of them, then I'll put them in a folder. If the group really warrants needing another folder. So for each DCC, for example, of course, they're going to get their own folders, all the Maya stuff together, all the Unreal stuff together, all the Substance stuff together. UI stuff, depending on how I do it, I could have like a Qt Python file and just like a UI components folder, and then every individual tool that's agnostic to a program could go in the root. I might make a UI folder, I don't really know. But the point is, like, I really just want to preserve the depth of the namespace and just make sure that it's, clean, not super convoluted, and everything has one shared parent at the very top. Also, I ended up deciding to name the pipeline Lucid. I figure, this will be my dream pipeline. So Lucid seemed like a fun name to go off of that theme. And yeah, so again, since I think I had brought up, well, I definitely did earlier in this video, I can't remember the extent that I did in the last, talking about not knowing how many DCCs there are, because various programs can have wildly different frameworks. I really like making like helper libraries be as agnostic as possible, and so a lot of those might go in the root, like debugging tools, IO tools. Eventually, as I kind of settle into a directory structure, I'm sure there will be some helper functions for conveniently, getting a file path based on a few parameters from the directory structure, and just auto builds the path for you or something like that. I don't tend to go super deep in my publish or my asset directory structures. Yeah, so here I'm starting work on the launcher. This would have been, in the last video, I kind of made a little box with 4 other boxes, and that's basically all I'm going to do. It's just some application that's got 4 buttons, and I can launch this. I'll probably start with just running the actual Python file for a while, and then eventually I'll either compile it or make a bat file that calls it. And yeah, that'll just launch the different DCCs with the environments that I have loaded for them. That way then they can read from here. And all dynamic paths, the pipeline should, if you launch the launcher from the pipeline, it'll understand, where the pipeline is from wherever you launch it from. Again, really basic standard stuff. And I might in the future also make some various other tools like a batch renamer. I'm for sure going to have the pipeline settings menu in here. And we'll see how many others, hopefully not too many, or I can make the kind of put those into a submenu. Maybe I make a review tool that's something that we can put notes on and sort of store, like even if it's for my own stuff, I can say, hey, I need to fix this thing, and eventually I can go back through it. Or if I give it to someone else, then they can kind of review their team stuff. Again, though, we'll have to be thinking about, like I brought up in the last video, if everyone's on a remote drive, then how are we getting stuff from user to user? Are we going to be using some sort of Git source control or a Perforce source control or what? Which is an interesting thought about the asset pipeline. If you have different artists, each with their own remote drive, and they're publishing assets, are they just storing the assets they have? Like what is, because there's probably not going to be one unified collection of assets, or there might be. I guess it kind of depends on how the team wants to operate. Maybe make something that pushes and pulls from like a Google Drive or something, or an AWS drive. And again, I want to write all of my UIs out by hand. I just think that the Qt editor, it's very frustrating to use. They've got like pixel thin margins for dragging and dropping stuff between other things. You have to do a bunch of extra boilerplate to just get stuff running. There's the basic UI. So I got the 4 buttons on just a horizontal box and it works. And here I'm just going to go pick a free theme. This place, what is this? Dev qss-stock.devsecstudio. They have a bunch of free QSS style sheets. I think they're all done by like under the MIT license. So it's free to use, and just put that in. I think I choose the Combinier one, which is one that I kind of like in the past. I've used in the past. It's pretty clean. It's kind of as far as color scheme goes, pretty in between. It's pretty modern looking, kind of minimalist and dark, and pretty in between of the shades between Maya and Unreal. So it kind of looks like it almost belongs to either. And yeah, just pretty. I keep saying pretty standard, but that's really all that there is at the beginning. And my preferred workflow when I go through is to write out as much of the code as I think needs to be there, really just thinking about getting ideas down for the control flow, and then I'll go through and clean up all the errors afterwards, and then when it's fully running, I'll go through and try to do each possible use case that I can, or as many as I can depending on the tool, to look for errors. If I write tests, it kind of goes a bit more extensively. It sort of depends on what the tool is, what you how much you care about it constantly working. So here, after everything's kind of written out, I'm just going through and cleaning up the errors, and also deciding based on the config where I want to put stuff, because I know that there's going to be this menu that lets us edit values from our configs, but I also have this kind of constants file, and this is supposed to be things that won't really change, that just kind of work. that I don't have to constantly derive. I can just import the file and get this value. Maybe it's a path, maybe it's like the naming convention stuff. So here I think I'm trying to add, I don't really remember, trying to add the resource path or something, and I'm just kind of weeding through the errors as I decide which way I want to do it. So pretty unexciting at the start. I don't I don't really have much more to say. I mean, it's just, get the CLI and the launch thing working, make a basic UI to launch programs, and that's it. But I've only got a few more seconds. I think this here does it. And there we go. Now it works.